My name is Lauren Carter, and at 34, I thought I had finally built a life no one could shake. Years of grinding through long nights in the corporate finance world had paid off. I owned a sleek condo in downtown Chicago with a view of the skyline that made every sunset look like a painting. My savings account was solid, my investments were smart, and my credit score was impeccable. But here's the twist: none of those things could protect me from the person I never thought I'd have to guard against my own brother. It's strange how quickly the foundation you've built can feel like sand slipping through your fingers. Growing up, I had always been the dependable one, the one who cleaned up messes, paid back borrowed money, and stayed out of trouble. My younger brother Evan was the charming wild card, the one who could smile his way out of consequences. That dynamic had been set in stone since we were kids. I thought I had accepted it. But nothing could have prepared me for the night Evan decided my financial security was just another thing he could take. It happened on a Tuesday in early spring. I'd been working late on a high-stakes presentation that could secure a multi-million-dollar client for my firm. I came home exhausted, ready to shut the world out for a few hours. My phone buzzed. It was Evan. His voice had that shaky, almost vulnerable tone I rarely heard. He told me he'd had a falling out with his roommate and had nowhere to stay for the night. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That's what siblings do, right? We open the door when family knocks. But even as I texted him my building address, a small knot of unease twisted in my gut. I pushed it down, telling myself I was being paranoid. When he arrived, he carried a duffel bag far too big for someone claiming to crash just one night. We ate a simple dinner while he told vague stories about the argument with his roommate. The details didn't add up, but I didn't press. I was too tired, too distracted. As he glanced around my condo, I caught a look in his eyes I couldn't place. At the time, not admiration, but calculation. I set up the couch for him, then retreated to my bedroom. My nightly routine was automatic purse on the nightstand phone charging next to it. I took the prescribed sleep aid my doctor had given me for stressful weeks like this. Within minutes, the weight of exhaustion and medication pulled me under. I didn't hear the soft click of my bedroom door. I didn't see him step inside. I didn't feel him take my wallet. But he was there. Later, I'd learn how precise his actions were. He photographed my premium credit card, captured every number, expiration date, and security code. He even used my sleeping face to unlock my phone and forward all banking notifications to himself. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely defenseless, and it was by choice because I'd let him in. That night while I slept, Evan was wide awake, and he was spending. Before I go further, if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what boundaries you've had to set in your own life. Sometimes sharing these moments is the first step to taking back your power. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a chain reaction that would push me to my breaking point, force me to confront the truth about my family, and redefine what I thought loyalty meant. The life I'd fought for was about to be tested in a way no balance sheet or credit report could measure. And the price wasn't just money, it was everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and freedom. Growing up in the suburbs of Cleveland, our family home always seemed like a stage where the same play ran on repeat. I was the straight-A student, the one who never missed curfew, the one who helped Dad balance the checkbook at 13. Evan, he was the lovable troublemaker late to dinner, skipping homework, crashing his bike into the neighbor's fence. But somehow those missteps were cute, or just boys being boys. It was more than favoritism, it was a culture. When Evan broke a window playing baseball, Dad laughed it off and bragged about his strong arm. When he failed a math test, Mom said the teacher just didn't understand his creative mind. Meanwhile, if I brought home an A-, it was met with, "What happened here?" If my room was less than spotless, I'd be grounded until every corner gleamed. That double standard wasn't just frustrating, it trained us. Evan learned he could talk or charm his way out of anything. I learned that if I wanted something to be done right, I had to do it myself. That dynamic followed us into adulthood, like an invisible tether. In college, while I worked 2 part-time jobs and interned every summer, Evan bounced between majors like a tourist sampling restaurants, political science one semester, marketing the next, then something called digital culture studies, which I'm still not convinced was a real major. Each time he got bored or failed out, Mom and Dad covered the bills and told him he'd find his passion eventually. I thought I'd escaped it when I graduated, moved out, and built a career in finance. But Evan was never far from my life or my wallet. Over the years, he borrowed money for rent, needed help with a car payment, or asked me to co-sign for apartments. Sometimes he paid me back, most times he didn't. I told myself I was helping him get on his feet, that it was just part of being an older sibling. But the truth, every loan only kept him in the same cycle and kept me in mind, the rescuer, the fixer, the one who covered the damage while Mom and Dad clapped from the sidelines. The breaking point, or at least what I thought was the breaking point, came 3 weeks before that Tuesday night. Evan called asking for $2,500 to buy a suit and gear for a new sales job. I asked for the company's name and the offer letter. He dodged. When I pressed, he admitted there was no job yet, just really promising interviews. I said no. Dinner that Sunday was tense. Mom gave me that look, the one that said I'd just committed some moral crime by not enabling him. "Lauren, you have more than enough," she said. "He's your brother. Family helps family." "Helping isn't the same as financing bad decisions," I replied. Dad stared at his plate. Evan pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the floor and stormed out. I drove home with the same old knot in my stomach, the one I'd had since childhood, the knot that came from knowing my boundaries would always be painted as selfishness. What I didn't know that night was that my refusal didn't end the conversation for Evan. It just moved it underground. And in his mind, the easiest way to get what he wanted wasn't to earn it. It was to take it. Looking back now, I can see the setup so clearly. The late-night call about his fight with his roommate. The oversized duffel bag. The way he kept asking about my schedule the next morning, whether I'd be home, whether my building was pretty secure. But in the moment, I was blind. I still thought of him as the reckless little brother who might annoy me but wouldn't cross the line into betrayal. And maybe that's why I want to ask you, how many of you have ignored that gut feeling because it was family? How many times have you convinced yourself that the rules can bend just this once for someone you love? I'd done it all my life. And on that Tuesday night, I did it again. I opened my door, let him in, and tried to believe that this time would be different. It wasn't. That door wasn't just to my condo. It was to my bank account, my privacy, and my peace of mind. And Evan was about to walk right through all of it. By the time I was 22, I'd already lived in more cities than Evan had held jobs. My post-college life was a blur of coffee-fueled mornings, late nights under fluorescent lights, and a determination to build something no one could take away from me. I started as an entry-level analyst at a mid-sized finance firm in Chicago, making just enough to cover rent for a tiny studio and ramen dinners. But I didn't mind. Every step forward felt like proof that hard work mattered. While I was climbing, Evan was coasting. After dropping out of his third college program, he took a string of retail and restaurant jobs, each ending the same way: a no-show shift, a toxic boss, and a tearful phone call to our parents. They'd send him rent money or buy him a reliable used car to replace the one repossessed for missed payments. I remember one Christmas when I flew home after a grueling quarter at work. I'd just landed a promotion and a small bonus, which I'd planned to use to finally upgrade my laptop. Evan, on the other hand, was on his third job hunt of the year. Yet he still unwrapped a brand new gaming console from our parents, grinning like he'd earned it. I got a scarf and an awkward, "We're so proud of you," before the conversation shifted back to Evan's big plans for next year. That's when I started saving aggressively, not just for the usual reasons, but because deep down, I knew I couldn't count on anyone else to have my back. I built an emergency fund, maxed out my retirement contributions, and kept my credit spotless. Eventually, that discipline earned me access to a premium black-tier credit card with a massive limit and travel perks I rarely used. It wasn't about flashing status. It was about knowing I had a safety net, one I had created entirely on my own. Meanwhile, Evan kept drifting. There were spurts of ambition, a semester of real estate classes, a short-lived online clothing store, but they always fizzled. And somehow, each failure was reframed by my parents as a learning experience. I tried not to get involved. I stopped co-signing leases. I refused to spot him rent. But the calls kept coming. Then came the request for $2,500 for a job opportunity. When I asked for proof, he got defensive, saying I didn't trust him. The truth was I didn't, and for good reason. I told him no. His reaction was pure theater, storming out of dinner, muttering about how money had changed me, how I'd forgotten what family meant. But what he said later that night stuck with me. You think you're untouchable now, don't you? I brushed it off as bitterness. I didn't see it for what it really was, a warning. Looking back, I realized that moment marked the shift. He stopped asking. He started planning. Evan wasn't just careless, he was observant. He'd been to my condo once before for a housewarming. He knew where I kept my purse. He'd seen the black card in my wallet when I paid for takeout that night. He knew my work schedule, my insomnia, even the fact that I sometimes used a prescription sleep aid. At the time, I didn't connect the dots. I thought I was protecting myself by keeping my finances separate from him. I didn't realize that sometimes the biggest threat isn't someone having access, it's them knowing exactly how to bypass the locks. If you've ever had someone study you like that, really look for the cracks, the kind of chill it leaves behind. I wish I'd paid attention to that feeling sooner. Instead, I told myself that distance was enough. That saying no to loans meant I was safe. But with Evan, boundaries weren't walls, they were puzzles to be solved. 3 weeks after that dinner, he'd have his solution. And I'd learned that the life I'd built wasn't nearly as unshakable as I thought. 3 weeks after I turned him down for that $500, the air between us had gone cold. We weren't speaking much, which honestly was a relief. I could focus on work without feeling guilty every time my phone lit up with his name. But under the surface, I could feel something brewing, that almost imperceptible tension you get when someone's smiling at you but sharpening a knife behind their back. That Sunday, I went to my parents' house for dinner the first time since the blow-up. I should have known it wouldn't go smoothly. Mom greeted me with a tight smile, her eyes scanning me like she was sizing up my mood before deciding how much to push. Dad was quieter than usual already, halfway through a glass of bourbon. Evan wasn't there. Halfway through the meal, Mom dropped it casually, as if she were mentioning the weather. She said, passing me the salad, Evan's been applying to jobs again. He really could use some help getting back on his feet. I set the tongs down. I told him before I'll help with his resume interview prep, whatever he needs, but I'm not handing him cash. Her mouth tightened. It's not like you can't afford it, Lauren. Dad cleared his throat. It's family. Family helps each other. I felt my pulse pick up the same way it always did when these conversations started. Helping is different from enabling, I said. And you both know how this goes. I give him money, it disappears, and nothing changes. Mom sighed, that long-suffering sound she'd perfected over the years. You've gotten selfish since you've had success. That hit the same nerve it always did, the one that whispered, maybe they were right. Maybe I was too protective of what I'd built. But then I remembered the countless loans that had vanished into bars, sneakers, or mysterious investments Evan never explained. The conversation spiraled from there. Mom brought up the time I'd borrowed her car in college, conveniently forgetting I'd returned it with a full tank and a new set of tires. Dad muttered something about how I didn't understand what it was like to struggle, as if I hadn't spent my 20s living off black coffee and canned soup to keep from drowning in student loans. By the time dessert came out, I'd had enough. I stood, thanked them for dinner, and left. In the rearview mirror, I saw Mom watching from the porch, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Driving home, that knot in my stomach was back tight and unyielding. I told myself it was just another family argument, that it would blow over. But deep down, I knew this one was different. The look in Mom's eyes, the way Dad's voice had hardened it, felt like lines were being drawn. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could almost hear Evan's voice again from that night weeks ago. You think you're untouchable now, don't you? What I didn't know then was that my refusal at dinner wasn't just a closed door to him. It was a challenge. And when Evan felt cornered, he didn't walk away. He found a side door. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. But when it's family, you don't want to believe they're capable of crossing certain lines. You convince yourself that your boundaries are clear enough to hold. And here's the thing I want you to really think about. Have you ever underestimated what someone will do when they feel entitled to your life? Because that was my mistake. I thought saying no was enough. I didn't realize that for some people, a no is just the start of the game. By the time I found out how far Evan was willing to go, it would already be too late. It was the Monday night before my biggest presentation of the quarter, and I'd promised myself I'd be in bed by 10. The stakes were massive. If we landed this client, it would mean millions in revenue for the firm and a hefty bonus for me. I had my outfit ready, my talking points memorized, and every chart triple-checked. All I needed was one decent night's sleep. That's when my phone rang. It was 8:47 p.m., and Evan's name lit up my screen. For a solid minute, I stared at it, debating whether to let it go to voicemail. But that knot of obligation, the one I'd been carrying since we were kids, won out. I answered. His voice was small, almost shaking. "Lauren, I hate to ask this, but I need a place to crash tonight." My first instinct was to say no. "Can't you stay with Mom and Dad? They're out of town, remember Vermont, some couple's getaway thing." "Look, I'll be gone first thing in the morning. I swear. I can't go back to my apartment tonight." There was a pause, the kind he always left hanging as if to let me fill it with sympathy. I didn't ask for details, but he gave them anyway, something about a fight with his roommate yelling over groceries slammed doors. It sounded flimsy, but I was too drained to press. I told myself it was just one night. 25 minutes later, he was at my door with a duffel bag that looked more like a weekender for someone fleeing the country than an overnight stay. He hugged me a little too long, thanked me profusely, and his eyes darted around my condo in that same way they had during my housewarming, scanning, noting. We had pasta because it was all I had the energy to make. He picked at his plate, tossing out more vague details about his fight, while asking oddly specific questions about my building. Did I know my neighbors well? How secure was the front entrance? Did my bedroom door ever stick from humidity? At the time, they sounded like idle chatter. In hindsight, they were reconnaissance. By 10:30, I was setting up the couch for him. "You okay here?" I asked. "Yeah. Hey, what time are you leaving tomorrow?" 7:30. Big day." "You seem stressed," he said almost too casually. "Sleeping okay?" "Not really," I admitted without thinking. "I've been using my sleep prescription this week. Helps me shut off." He nodded like he'd just been handed the last piece of a puzzle. That night, I went through my usual routine, purse and wallet on the nightstand, phone charging beside them. I took my pill, crawled into bed, and within 15 minutes I was under. Somewhere in the early hours, a door hinge moved without a squeak. I wouldn't learn until later what happened next. Evan slipping into my room, lifting my wallet, photographing both sides of my premium black card, memorizing its every detail. Then using my own sleeping face to unlock my phone, disabling banking alerts, and forwarding security texts to himself. While I slept like the dead, my guest was mapping out a shopping spree. Let me pause here and ask you something. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? Would you have let him in, knowing the history? Or would you have shut the door and risked the fallout? Drop your thoughts below, because hindsight may be clear, but in the moment, family complicates everything. I didn't know it then, but the choices I made that night would come with a $15,000 price tag and cost me something even harder: to replace my faith in the idea that family is a safe place to land. It was 2:13 a.m. when Evan made his move. I didn't hear the soft shuffle of his socks against my hardwood floors, or the faint metallic click as he tested my bedroom doorknob. I was under the kind of medicated sleep that doesn't let you dream, the kind where the world could burn and you'd still be breathing evenly, unaware. Later, when I pieced it all together, I realized how precise he'd been. He knew my apartment layout from the housewarming. He knew exactly where the creaky plank was in the hallway and avoided it. He knew my habit of leaving my purse on the nightstand. He slipped inside like a shadow. My phone sat unlocked beside the lamp. He angled it toward my face, and with one barely perceptible tilt, Face ID let him in. First, he disabled text alerts from my bank. Then he forwarded any security notifications to his own number. That part chilled me the most. He wasn't just taking, he was covering his tracks. Next came my wallet. He slid out the premium black card, holding it delicately, almost reverently. He took clear, bright photos of the front and back, making sure to capture every number, every embossed detail. He didn't even try to take the physical card. He didn't need to. By 2:24 a.m., Evan was in my kitchen, pulling a can of soda from the fridge as if to leave an alibi scent trail. Then he was back on the couch, scrolling his phone, mapping out his spree. The transactions started before sunrise. $1,200 at an electronics store in Milwaukee. $3,500 at a luxury watch dealer. $2,800 in gift cards from a high-end department store. $7,000 on jewelry and accessories at a boutique I'd never heard of. Each charge was clean, spaced out just enough to avoid automatic fraud detection. He'd clearly done his homework. I woke up at 6:45, groggy but focused on my presentation. Evan was gone, a neatly folded blanket on the couch, and a note that read, "Thanks again. You're the best." By the time I noticed anything was wrong, it was noon. I'd wrapped my meeting, nailed it actually, and checked my phone during lunch. There were no bank alerts, no missed calls. But when I opened my banking app out of habit, my balance didn't look right. At first, I thought it was a display error. Then I scrolled through the transactions. The numbers hit me like a cold slap. My breath went shallow. My lunch sat untouched. I called the bank immediately. The rep on the line was polite but matter of fact. These were processed with correct security credentials, Ms. Carter. The card wasn't reported stolen, and your alerts were disabled from your device. Can you confirm that was you? I wanted to scream. Of course it wasn't me who would... And then it clicked. Not who. Evan. It was like a film reel unspooling in my head, the late night arrival, the questions about my schedule, the interest in my sleep meds, the way he'd scanned my apartment like he was memorizing it. Every moment I'd dismissed as paranoia suddenly lined up with surgical precision. I hung up and dialed his number, straight to voicemail, texted him, no response. By the time I called my parents, I was shaking. I laid it all out, the visit, the timing, the charges. Mom's first words weren't, "Are you okay?" They were, "Lauren, you're overreacting." Evan wouldn't do that. Dad was blunter. "If your bank says it's you, maybe you should look at your own habits before blaming family." That hurt worse than the theft. It wasn't just about losing money anymore. It was about realizing that the safety net I thought I had with my family was nothing but frayed rope. And I'll tell you this, if you've ever had the people you trust the most turn their backs when you're telling the truth, you know it's a betrayal that burns deeper than any theft. The next step would be deciding whether to go to the police. But even that choice wasn't going to be as simple as I thought. The drive home that evening was a blur of taillights and static from the radio. My mind kept replaying the transactions, the empty couch, and my mother's voice telling me I was overreacting. The more I thought about it, the more a single question drilled into my skull. Do I call the police on my own brother? I parked outside my building and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel. This wasn't some petty family argument. This was grand larceny, premeditated, calculated. If it had been a stranger, I wouldn't have hesitated. But with Evan, the rules felt different. Or maybe I'd just been taught my whole life to think they were. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink. I opened my laptop and started researching. Reporting family theft brought up pages of stories, people torn between justice and loyalty, between protecting themselves and protecting blood. And the outcomes mostly ugly. Families split forever, parents choosing sides, holidays erased. That night, I called my friend Michelle, one of the few people in my life who had no patience for sugarcoating. After I explained everything, she didn't even pause. "Lauren, this is not a gray area. He stole from you. He manipulated you while you slept. You don't owe him protection." "I know," I said quietly. "But if I file a report, it's public record. My parents will never forgive me. They already don't believe you. What exactly are you trying to protect?" Her words lodged in my chest. I barely slept. By morning, I had made a decision halfway. I called the bank's fraud department again, explained I believed the theft was committed by a family member, and asked what could be done without filing a police report. The answer was short. Nothing. Without a formal report, they couldn't reverse the charges. That left me with two choices: eat the loss, or take a step that might burn the last bridge I had with my family. By lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop making calls. You'll regret it." I froze. The chill wasn't from the words themselves, but from the fact that he didn't even try to deny it. This was Evan telling me in plain language that he was willing to escalate. I saved the message, then did something I hadn't planned on. I drove straight to the police station. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, but my jaw was locked. Inside, I met with a detective, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, even voice. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the timeline, the amounts, the access to my apartment. I showed her the text. "This is serious," she said. "If what you're telling me is accurate, we're looking at felony charges." The word felony made my stomach twist. Filling out the report felt like crossing a point of no return. When it was done, the detective gave me a card. "We'll follow up. In the meantime, I'd recommend changing your locks, your phone password, and monitoring your accounts daily." That night, I installed a new deadbolt, updated every password I had, and set up two-factor authentication on everything from my bank to my grocery app. My home didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a fortress I'd been forced to build against someone who shared my DNA. And I need to ask you, if it were you, would you have done it? Would you have put your own brother's name on a police report, knowing what it could mean? Because I knew deep down that the next time I saw Evan, it wouldn't be across a dinner table. It would be across a courtroom. The call came 2 days later, just as I was leaving work. My mother's voice was tight the way it always got when she was furious but trying to sound composed. "Lauren," she said, "your father and I just heard from Evan. Is it true you filed a police report against him?" There it was, no preamble, no how are you. Straight to the accusation. "Yes," I said, "because he stole over $15,000 from me while I was asleep. He—" "Stop," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You're dragging our family name through the mud. He could go to prison." My father's voice joined in faint in the background. "We raised you better than this. You don't turn on family." I pulled my car over to the curb because my hands were shaking too hard to drive. "I didn't turn on family," I said. "Evan turned on me. He came into my home, took my card, and drained my account. And when I confronted you, you told me I was overreacting." "You could have come to us," my mother said. "I did, and you didn't believe me." There was a long pause. Then she delivered the line I'd been expecting, but still dreaded. "If you don't drop this, Lauren, you are no longer welcome in this family." Something inside me, the last small hope that they might choose me over him, went cold. "Then I guess that decision's already been made," I said, and I hung up. That night, I poured everything I was feeling into a letter I never planned to send. I wrote about the years I'd covered for Evan's mistakes, the late-night bailouts, the lies I told for him, the guilt trips I endured from my parents. I wrote about how loyalty without accountability is just enabling. And I wrote about how exhausted I was from being the responsible one whose boundaries could be broken at will. 2 days later, the storm hit in full force. I was coming home from the grocery store when I saw them, my parents, standing outside my building's front door, with Evan lurking a few steps behind. My father's arms were crossed. My mother's face was pinched tight. "We need to talk," she said. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, keeping my voice even. Evan stepped forward, and I noticed for the first time the faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "You're really going through with this? Over some charges on a piece of plastic?" "A piece of plastic." My voice cracked, but not from weakness, from sheer disbelief. "You committed a felony, Evan. You invaded my home. You stole from me." He shrugged. "You're acting like you're some innocent angel. You've had your share of help from me over the years." My father nodded. "Your siblings. Work it out. No need to get strangers involved." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "The strangers you're talking about are law enforcement. They exist because sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you're related to." Evan's smirk vanished. My mother's eyes darted to the neighbors peeking out from their doors, drawn by the rising voices. She grabbed my arm hard. "We can't fix this if you're going to make a scene." I pulled my arm free. "There's nothing to fix. I'm protecting myself. And if that embarrasses you, maybe you should be asking why your son thought he could get away with it." The tension broke when I stepped past them and into the building, leaving them on the sidewalk. My hands were trembling, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear, it was from adrenaline. Upstairs, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it. I knew that confrontation had just set fire to whatever fragile bridge remained between us. But I also knew something else. I was done letting family use love as leverage. Because here's the thing, sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to risk losing the people who've mistaken your kindness for weakness. And I wasn't weak anymore. 3 weeks passed in uneasy silence. I thought maybe Evan had lawyered up and decided to lay low, waiting for things to blow over. I was wrong. It started with a voicemail from the detective handling my case. "Ms. Turner, this is Detective Alvarez. We've uncovered some additional activity linked to your brother's account. I'd like you to come in as soon as possible." I called her back immediately. "What kind of activity?" "I'd rather go over it in person," she said, her tone flat but loaded. That night, I sat across from her in a small interview room at the precinct. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed statements from accounts I'd never seen before, Evan's accounts. Only they weren't just linked to my stolen card. There were transactions from at least 4 other cards. Different names, same pattern: luxury purchases, electronics, hotel stays. "Lauren, we believe your brother has been running a coordinated credit card scheme for months," Alvarez said. "Yours was just the most recent and frankly the sloppiest. He got too comfortable." My stomach dropped. "You're saying he's been stealing from other people too?" "Yes, and not just strangers. We've traced at least 2 cards back to your parents' friends. People who likely haven't even realized they've been hit yet." It felt like the air in the room had been sucked out. My parents, so quick to defend him, so eager to paint me as the villain, had no idea they might be victims themselves. "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll need your cooperation going forward," she said. "And I should warn you, this may escalate quickly. If we move forward with charges on all counts, we're looking at significant prison time." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Part of me felt vindicated proof that I hadn't overreacted, that this wasn't a one-off mistake. But another part of me was already bracing for the inevitable fallout. If my parents had been furious before learning Evan had been targeting their friends, might push them past the point of no return. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing flashes of our confrontation outside my building, my father's folded arms, my mother's tight grip. And then I imagined the moment they'd get a call from the detective telling them their son wasn't just borrowing from me, he was running a small-scale criminal operation. 2 days later, the open loop tightened. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoying yourself, Lauren. You think you've won. This isn't over." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I forwarded it to Alvarez immediately. Her reply was quick: "Do not respond. We're already monitoring his communications." I sat back in my chair, adrenaline making my fingertips tingle. If Evan was bold enough to threaten me in writing while under investigation, he was desperate. And desperation makes people dangerous. That night, I double-checked my locks, tested my security camera app, and slept with the lights in my hallway on. Here's where I'm leaving you hanging for a moment, because the next twist in this story didn't come from Evan. It came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, whose name I didn't even expect to hear again. And when they showed up at my door, they brought with them a truth about my family that made Evan's theft look like pocket change. But that is a reveal for later. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the sky looks bruised and heavy before a storm. I'd just set a mug of tea on the coffee table when the buzzer to my apartment rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" I asked through the intercom. A pause, then "It's Claire, your aunt." My breath caught. Claire, my mother's estranged sister. I hadn't seen her since I was 15, when a screaming match between her and my parents ended in slammed doors and years of radio silence. I hesitated, then pressed the door release. Moments later, she was standing in my living room, dripping rainwater onto the rug. Time had weathered her face, but sharpened her eyes. They looked at me with a mix of urgency and regret. "I know this is unexpected," she said, peeling off her wet jacket, "but I couldn't let what's happening go on without telling you the truth." I crossed my arms. "The truth about what, Evan?" She shook her head. "About your parents." I gestured for her to sit, my pulse picking up. "You've got my attention." Claire leaned forward. "When your father was in his 30s, he got into some serious financial trouble. Gambling. He lost tens of thousands. Your mother covered it up, sold jewelry, borrowed from friends, even took out loans in other people's names. One of those friends was my husband at the time. We found out only when debt collectors showed up. That's when the family split." I blinked, trying to connect the dots. "What does that have to do with Evan?" "Everything," she said. "Because your mother's solution wasn't just paying off your father's debts. She taught Evan how to work the system. Credit cards, identity slips, ways to make money disappear and reappear. He was a quick study." The room felt suddenly smaller. My stomach churned. "You're telling me my parents knew what he was doing?" Claire's eyes were steady, not just knew. They benefited. Evan's been their problem solver for years. When bills pile up, when repairs need paying for, he makes it happen. That's why they're defending him so fiercely now. They can't afford for him to be taken out of the equation. I sank back into the couch, my tea now cold on the table. All the times my parents had lectured me about loyalty, about not airing family business. It wasn't morality, it was self-preservation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I made the mistake of staying silent, and it cost me my marriage, my savings, and half my life. You've got a chance to get out before you lose everything, too." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, and for the first time I saw the weight she carried. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail notification. I played it on speaker without thinking. "Lauren, it's Dad. We heard Claire's been sniffing around. Don't believe a word she says. She's been bitter for decades. Remember, blood is blood. You'll regret turning your back on us." Claire's jaw tightened, but her eyes told me she'd expected it. I turned off the voicemail and sat there, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud in the silence. In one night, the foundation of my family history had shifted. Evan wasn't the lone wolf. He was part of a pack. And the people I thought I was protecting from scandal were the ones who had been feeding it. That night after Claire left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The storm outside finally broke rain, lashing against the windows. I realized the police investigation into Evan was just one battle. The war, the one for my own freedom from this toxic web, was only beginning. And here's the question I keep turning over in my head. When the truth about your family rots to the core, do you cut out the infected branch? Or burn down the whole tree? The next morning, the rain was gone, but the air still felt heavy. I stood at my kitchen counter, coffee in hand, staring at a blank legal pad. My mind was a tangled mess of memories, warnings, and Claire's voice echoing, "Get out before you lose everything too." For the first time, I understood that dealing with Evan wasn't just about getting my money back or protecting myself from one thief. It was about dismantling an entire family system that had been built on lies, manipulation, and financial exploitation. And if I didn't move strategically, I'd be the next casualty. So I started with the basics, documenting everything. Every text from Evan, every voicemail from my parents, every detail Claire had shared. I even printed out the bank statements and the detective's notes, tucking them into a locked file box. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. I knew I couldn't confront my parents directly, not yet. The moment they sensed I was turning the heat up, they'd try to box me in. Instead, I focused on quietly untangling myself from every shared tie. I called my bank and closed the joint safety deposit box my mother had insisted we keep for emergencies. I transferred my savings to a separate credit union 2 towns over. I went through my bills and made sure no utilities or accounts were still under a family address. It was tedious, but with each change I felt a small piece of their grip loosen. Midway through the week, Detective Alvarez called again. "We're getting closer to making an arrest," she said. "But I want to warn you, once this goes down, your family will know you were a key witness. You need to be ready for blowback." I almost laughed. They've been coming after me for weeks. I'm ready. But deep down, I knew I wasn't not for the kind of blowback that could get ugly outside the boundaries of words. That night, my apartment buzzer rang again. This time it wasn't Claire. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a baseball cap holding a padded envelope. No name, no return address. He left it at my door and walked away without knocking. Inside was a single Polaroid photo my car parked outside my workplace. Scrawled on the back in black marker, "We see you." I didn't need a signature to know this was connected to Evan. Whether it was a scare tactic or a warning, it meant the game had shifted. I called Alvarez immediately. She told me to save the envelope and photo and to consider relocating temporarily. "You're not paranoid if they really are watching you," she said. That was the moment I decided to stop playing defense. If my family had built their power on secrets and intimidation, I was going to dismantle it the same way, piece by piece, truth by truth. I reached out to Claire again, this time with a proposition. If I'm going to stand up to them, I need more than stories. I need proof. She didn't hesitate. "Meet me tomorrow. I'll bring you something they can't talk their way out of." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I'd crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing to expose them, no matter how deep it went. And I have to ask you here, if you knew the truth could destroy your family's reputation forever, would you still share it with the world? Or would you live with the weight of silence just to keep the peace? The next afternoon, I met Claire at a small diner off the highway, the kind of place where nobody pays attention to who walks in or out. She was already in a corner booth, a manila envelope on the table between us like it was a live grenade. "I've been holding on to this for years," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "Wasn't sure if it was worth blowing up what's left of the family over. But after hearing what Evan's done to you, it's time." She pushed the envelope toward me. My fingers hesitated before pulling it open. Inside were photocopies of documents, loan agreements, forged signatures, and bank transfer records. But the real gut punch was the last set of pages, a notarized statement from a man I didn't recognize detailing how he'd been paid to open credit lines in his name and funnel the funds back to my parents. The dates went back more than 15 years, and in several cases, Evan's name appeared as a facilitator. This wasn't just a recent scam, it was a family business. I stared at the pages, my throat tight. "How did you get all this?" "Some of it was left behind when your mom and dad tried to hide what they'd done to me and my husband. The rest I gathered from people they burned along the way. Most never came forward because they were either scared or too embarrassed to admit they'd been conned by family." My hands trembled as I flipped through the last page. This wasn't just proof. This was dynamite, the kind that could take down my parents, Evan, and anyone tied to their network. Claire sipped her coffee, watching me. You have a choice. You can hand this to the police and let the legal system take it from here. Or you can use it strategically to make sure they can't hurt you again, whether or not they end up in prison. I leaned back, my mind spinning. Strategically sounded a lot like leverage. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail, no caller ID. I hit play, and the voice that filled the speaker made my skin crawl. Lauren, you're digging in places you shouldn't. If you keep going, you won't just lose your family, you'll lose everything. Think about it. I didn't need to ask who it was. My father's tone was cold, calculated. This wasn't the disappointed parent I'd grown up with. This was a man protecting his empire. Claire shook her head. That's the problem. They think fear will stop you. It won't. Not if you decide you're done letting them write the rules. I folded the documents back into the envelope. If we do this, we do it on my terms. No leaks. No half measures. She smiled faintly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. We spent the next hour sketching out a plan, who to approach first, how to protect ourselves, and how to make sure if they struck back, they'd do it with the whole truth hanging over their heads like a guillotine. As I left the diner, the envelope pressed against my side, I realized I was no longer just a target in their game. I was holding the one card they couldn't afford to see played. And here's the part that will sting later, the moment I used it. I knew there would be no way back to the version of family I once had. The only question was whether burning that bridge would feel like loss or liberation. The first step of the plan was the most dangerous, make them believe I was still under their thumb while quietly pulling the rug out from under them. I started small. I called my mother on Sunday afternoon, my voice carefully measured. I've been thinking, maybe Claire exaggerated. I don't want to get caught up in her bitterness. Her relief was instant. I knew you'd come around, Lauren. Blood is blood. Don't let outsiders poison you against your own family. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. You're right. I'll stop asking questions. It was a lie so clean she never saw the edges? Meanwhile, I'd already met with Detective Alvarez again. I gave her half the evidence from Claire's envelope, just enough to lock in the investigation without tipping my family off that I had more. She read the pages with raised brows. If this is only part of what you've got, your parents and brother are in deeper trouble than I thought. That's the idea, I said. I want them distracted while I make sure they can't erase me financially or legally. We arranged a quiet meeting with a financial crimes prosecutor who specialized in long-term fraud cases. I didn't give names right away, but when I outlined the structure of what my family had been running, he leaned back in his chair. If this is accurate, they've been operating like a small-scale crime syndicate. That night I staged a visit to my parents' house, the first in weeks. I brought cookies, smiled through my father's probing questions, and pretended not to notice Evan watching me from the hallway, his eyes calculating. At one point, my dad leaned closer. I hope you're not talking to the police about family matters. I met his gaze and let the silence hang for a beat too long. Of course not. Inside, I was rehearsing the next step, the leak. 2 days later, I arranged for a copy of one particularly damning loan document with Evan's signature to find its way anonymously into the hands of a local reporter known for covering corruption. I knew it wouldn't hit the press right away. Journalists verify, but it planted a seed that would grow in the background, adding pressure from another angle. By midweek, I could feel the shift. My parents started calling more often, their tones swinging from syrupy affection to subtle threats. Evan sent me a single text, "You're playing a dangerous game." He was right, and I was winning. Claire checked in daily, making sure I wasn't wavering. They've survived this long because nobody ever pushed back. You're doing what the rest of us were too afraid to. Still, every move carried risk. Late Thursday night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing inside was stolen, but someone had gone through my desk drawers. The file box with the original documents was untouched. I'd hidden it in a place they'd never think to look, but the message was clear. They wanted me to know they could reach me anytime. I sat on my couch in the dim light envelope of evidence in my lap and understood the stakes in a way I hadn't before. This wasn't about hurt feelings or awkward holidays. This was about survival. And here's where I'll leave you hanging, because the next move I made didn't just push my family into a corner. It forced one of them to turn on the others. And that's when everything unraveled. It happened on a cold Friday night, the kind where the wind slices through your coat no matter how tightly you wrap it. I was making tea when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Lauren, it's Evan. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I didn't say anything, letting the silence draw him out. I think we should talk, away from Mom and Dad. I nearly laughed. Why would I meet with you? Because I know what you have, and I know they'll burn me to save themselves. I'm not going down for their mess. That was the first crack in the wall I'd been hammering at for weeks. Evan wasn't calling to intimidate me, he was calling because he was scared. We met in the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy. He looked rough eyes, bloodshot hands, fidgeting with his jacket zipper. He didn't waste time. They've been moving money again, funneling it through some charity accounts. If you want to really nail them, follow that trail. But... He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. You have to leave me out of it. I'll give you enough to sink them, but I want immunity. I crossed my arms. Why should I believe you? Because I know you've been talking to Alvarez, and if I go down with them, I'll drag you through hell on the way. This way we both get out clean. It was a classic self-preservation move, but it also handed me something I didn't have before a live insider willing to flip. I recorded every word. Not secretly, I pulled out my phone, set it on the hood of my car, and hit record in plain sight. He didn't flinch. When I brought the file to Detective Alvarez the next morning, she leaned back in her chair. You realize this changes everything, right? With Evan cooperating, we can move faster. But it also means your parents will know you've got someone on the inside. Let them know, I said. I'm done playing small. The next 48 hours moved like a storm. Alvarez's team started tracing the charity accounts Evan mentioned. The numbers told a story uglier than I'd imagined: donations rerouted into shell corporations, cash withdrawals in multiple states, and names of people I'd never heard of suddenly popping up in connection to my family. By Sunday evening, my phone blew up with calls from my mother. I let them go to voicemail. On the third one, her voice cracked with fury. How dare you turn your own brother against us? Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I did. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. What I felt was inevitability. Once the first domino falls, the rest don't stop just because you wish they would. That night, I stood at my window looking out at the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, and realized there was no longer any version of my life where I could quietly slip away from this. It was all in motion now. And here's the part you won't want to miss: the moment the knock came at my door, and instead of the police or a threat, it was someone I never expected to see, holding something that could either save me or destroy me completely. The knock came just after midnight, sharp, deliberate, not the frantic pounding of a threat, but the kind of sound that says, I know you're awake, and I'm not leaving. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the deadbolt. Who is it? A pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in years. It's Aunt Marlene. We need to talk. My chest tightened. Marlene had been the family's black sheep long before I was old enough to understand why. Whispers about bad choices and burning bridges followed her name like a shadow, but I'd always suspected she was more victim than villain. She'd vanished from our lives when I was 12. When I opened the door, she stepped in like she was crossing into enemy territory, cautious, scanning my apartment before her eyes settled on me. In her hand was a weathered leather satchel. Lock the door, she said. I did, my mind racing. What are you doing here? She dropped the satchel onto my kitchen table and unzipped it. Inside were folders, flash drives, and, to my shock, photographs. My parents, my brother, and a string of strangers in hotel lobbies, expensive restaurants, even a marina. I've been keeping tabs, she said. Not for revenge, for protection. They burned me same as they're burning you now. Only difference is I started collecting receipts before they cut me off. She slid a folder toward me. Inside was a contract from nearly 2 decades ago, my father's signature beside the name of a man later convicted of embezzlement. This ties them to people the feds still have open cases on. If you hand this over, they won't just be facing state charges. It'll go federal. The air felt heavier. Federal meant prison time that couldn't be talked away or negotiated down with a family lawyer. It meant no more late-night threats, no more shadow games. I thought of Evan now, somewhere between traitor and reluctant ally. Of Claire, who'd carried her own scars for years. Of every voicemail and veiled warning my parents had sent my way. And I thought about what it would mean to be truly free of them. Marlene leaned in, her voice low. You can't half-step this, Lauren. You take them down all the way or they'll crawl back out and drag you under. You understand? I nodded slowly. I understand. By dawn, Alvarez had the satchel in her hands. She didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes, a sharp glint of satisfaction. With this, we move now, and we move hard. The raids happened 2 days later. My parents were arrested at their home. Evan turned himself in as part of his deal. The charity accounts were frozen, assets seized, and for the first time in my life, the power dynamic shifted completely. But here's the truth. Victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like standing in the wreckage of something you'd been told was home and realizing you'd been living in a stranger's house the whole time. Still, there was relief. There was space to breathe. And in that space, I made myself a promise. Never again would I confuse blood with loyalty or silence with peace. If you've been listening this far, you already know the story didn't end here. What came next was building a life from the ground up, one I chose for myself. And that's a story worth hearing. But it's for another video. In the weeks after the arrests, my apartment felt quieter than it ever had. Not just in sound, but in weight. No late-night phone calls. No footsteps in the hallway that made me freeze. Just stillness. At first it was disorienting. For so long my life had been a constant state of bracing for impact. Now I was learning how to unclench my jaw, how to drink my coffee without scanning the street outside my window. I began small rituals to fill the silence, morning walks, before the city woke, cooking dinner without my phone nearby, keeping fresh flowers on the table just because they made the room brighter. I called Claire more often, not just to talk about the case, but to share little things, a recipe that worked, a movie worth watching. We were building something new piece by piece. One Sunday I took a drive out to the coast. The sky was overcast, the kind that makes the horizon blur into the sea. Standing there, toes in the cold sand, I realized I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about me, about what I could do with all this newfound space in my life. Freedom, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause or grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as waking up and knowing no one else owns your story anymore. I'm not naive, I know the past will always exist, and shadows have a way of stretching long. But I also know this, I've stepped out from under theirs. And every day I choose to keep walking toward a life that's mine. Because in the end, peace isn't something they can give me. It's something I had to take back, and I did.